Welcome to Kingdom Polemics. We are continuing our mini-series responding to the Heidelcast mini-series Contra Post-Millennialism. They are reading a bunch of quotes from certain authors that are amillennial, Contra Post-Millennialism. Now, someone recommended to me that I should play the content from Heidelcast and then interact with it, because it's not likely that a lot of people would see our show notes, listen to Heidelcast, and then listen to my response. So we're going to do you a favor and have what Scott is reading and also what I'm saying going back to back. So I will start playing the episode number 11. This is a Venema quote. Let's go ahead and start.
The cost of bandwidth shrinks. Our passage today begins on page 354, and this will finish the section from Professor Venema's book. The point of these passages is not that every believer and church in this present age will suffer in the same way or to the same extent, nor do they deny that at many times and in various places, the cause of Christ's gospel and kingdom will enjoy the most wonderful success and blessing. No doubt, as believers have already witnessed, nations will be discipled, kingdoms opposed to Christ will topple, and kingdom standards will transform the life of people and nations. The passages cited do not contradict any of these things. They certainly do not teach, for example, that believers who enjoy prosperity and peace must somehow be guilty of unbiblical compromise or accommodation. But they do teach that in this present age, the believer and the church must always expect and anticipate some fellowship in the suffering.
All right, so interesting here, the quote that Scott is reading says that, hey, there are obviously times where nations are discipled, nations are affected, nations are transformed, kingdoms that oppose Christ are toppled. Now, this is intriguing to me because as you followed all of these quotes, there has been many quotes from Scott in his own material, and also these quotes that we cannot talk about the work of the gospel in a sense that it would disciple nations, in a sense that it would topple kingdoms. That's been stated many times. And he just said that we have seen the gospel transform nations and disciple nations and topple those things that counter that. So Scott has admitted through this quote that the work of the gospel does disciple nations, even though when someone like myself makes a case for the Great Commission being discipling of nations, he says that that is inappropriate understanding of that term, and that is simply reading the Old Testament without being sensitive to the New Testament. But yet we see here that they say, yeah, we have seen nations discipled and societies transformed by the gospel. Now, my question is, what does this? Is it the gospel that does this that we've seen in history, or is it something else? If it is the gospel and the kingdom, then why would it be inappropriate for us who are in the post-millennial world to say, since you said this is what has happened, for us to say that, yes, it does happen because this is conducive and consistent with what the gospel is said to accomplish through regeneration. Okay. And I guess to Scott's point, well, yeah, it does happen. God does transform nations and disciple nations, but it is an anomaly. And my question is, why is it necessarily an anomaly? Why couldn't it be a case for the seed principle? The reason why we're seeing kingdoms that oppose Christ toppled, like we've seen in history, the reason why we're seeing nations identify with Christ, as we've seen in many places, is because this is the seed principle. Okay. But people like him need to say this because they need to make some kind of sense as to why they are currently in a situation that has centuries preceding them of prosperity of the gospel and freedom from political persecution. They have to have some kind of a reason. Well, this doesn't normally happen, but guess what? It's kind of happened for centuries now, but it's an anomaly. So let's keep listening.
sufferings of Christ. Preaching of the gospel and the advance of the kingdom always call forth a counter-gospel, a reaction of unbelief and opposition. And so believers learn obedience through their suffering, just as Christ their Lord.
So he starts talking, quoting again, about how the church is in fellowship with Christ's sufferings. And I'm like, yes and amen. But guess what? This is what postmillennialists are saying, that the church is also in fellowship with Christ's ascension triumph. We participate in the sufferings of Christ, and we experience that horizontally in the way the world, but we also participate in the ascension triumph of Christ. And also, he says, believers learn through their sufferings. Amen. Believers do learn through their sufferings. But guess what? Believers also learn through not suffering persecution from the gospel. Okay? Just think about the councils where the kings and princes were not opposing the church, but they were calling the church to consider matters theological for the peace of the empire. Consider Westminster Abbey, where believers learn. Guess what? We all have learned a lot of doctrine. We've been taught a lot through the powers of this age, not opposing the church, but calling the church to sit down and consider doctrine. Okay? So what we are saying in the postmillennial perspective is that their oversimplified view of believers learning through sufferings and sharing in the sufferings of Christ as the summarizing paradigm, it's not biblically appropriate. It's not historically even grounded. Let's keep going.
Master did, Hebrews 5:8. They understand firsthand the meaning of Hebrews 13:12 through 14. Let us go outside the camp, bearing his reproach, for here we do not have a lasting city, but we are seeking the city which is to come. Compare Hebrews 12:3. Golden Age postmillennialism mutes this biblical teaching about the fellowship in suffering between Christ and his disciples.
Okay. Glory age postmillennialism. Notice he keeps saying glory age postmillennialism. He doesn't have a category for postmillennialism that's not glory age. He's basically saying that postmillennialism is a glory age theology. I haven't heard him say anything. Well, there is a non-glory age postmillennialism. Pretty much postmillennialism is a glory age theology. He says it mutes and excludes the sufferings and tribulations of the Christian life. Let me say to you again, that is not true. No legitimate postmillennial believes that. And so therefore, if you are making a case for why a position is unbiblical because they mute suffering and persecution when the position doesn't do so, and that means that the person that is critiquing this position is critiquing it from a lack of credibility, and they're overstating things because they don't have a legitimate case to build. And this is what happens with people like Scott Clark and others is they state things in such a way that is not true, so that when you hear it, you're like, oh my goodness, like how on earth could we buy into some theology that believes that there's no suffering in the Christian life and we shouldn't expect persecution? That's ridiculous and absurd. That's not what we believe. Okay. We'll listen to a little bit more before we close.
No matter how it is qualified or described, the millennium of postmillennialist expectation excludes these dimensions of what it means to be a follower of Christ in the present age. Consequently, postmillennialism betrays a triumphalist theology of glory that prematurely anticipates in history what will be the circumstance of God's people only in the day of their vindication. Only Christ's coming again will bring an end to the trouble that
the key word is postmillennials. They tell God's people to expect what people only are to expect in the consummate eschaton. Okay, postmillennials teach that we will only experience sinlessness and the comprehensive bliss in the eschaton only when our bodies are raised and sin is obliterated and apostasy in every single crevice is annihilated. Only then will we experience it. We don't teach that any of that is experienced in the present. The consummate glory is exclusively to be experienced in the consummation. Only when our bodies are glorified and we are sinless, and this earth is rid of all unrighteousness, and the lake of fire exiles people. That's we only experience that. However, we don't believe that the only relief of the Christian against evil is experienced exclusively in the future. Okay, when Herod is killed by God and protects Peter, there is some relief from evil. When God converts people, when God converts Paul, and he stops being someone who is assaulting the church, we believe that there is some present relief from evil, even though it's not the ultimate relief from evil. Okay, we believe that when King Nebuchadnezzar stops seeking to kill Christians and says the Christian religion must be protected and promoted by the state, that there is some relief in this life. And let me say, the idea that because we believe that God will convert more people, that will affect more things, means that we are not seeking we're seeking to find rest in this life. Like, let me keep going. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Marks out the Christian's pilgrimage in this life as he or she anticipates the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. No more than Abraham or the saints of the past or the believer today, able to find rest in this life. Stay tuned to the Heidelcast. There's more to come.
Scott Clark, Venema, anybody else, I do not believe that we can find ultimate end-time rest in this life. Okay? My ultimate end-time rest is in the glorious future of the consummate eschaton. However, simply because I believe in ultimate end-time rest, it doesn't mean that I cannot believe that people will be converted and their families will look different. Their vocational lives will look different. When God converts kings and princes, it doesn't mean that I don't believe that they can promote more just laws that are more conducive to humans living a life of dignity and peace. The idea that this is how Scott Clark puts it. The idea that we could see sanctification not just of the Christian, but sanctification of the Christian's whole sphere of life. That we will see that and expect to see that as God continues to make the small seed larger. That we're not seeking to find ultimate end time rest in the consummate glory. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. Okay, just because I'm expecting to be more fruitful in my Christian walk, right, as years go on, does not mean that I am not still at the same time hoping in the ultimate rest I will have in glory. See, what Scott Clark and his authors do is they oversimplify something and they overstate things at the expense of other things. So you're either hoping in glory or you believe that Christ is going to, in the inaugural phase of the kingdom, bring some relief from sin in the present as we experience the new creation in the present, right? So you're either hoping in the future or you're talking about in the present, God's rule and reign of grace comprehensively bringing relief to the sinful enslaved life in the present. So you either believe that or the other. No, I can believe that God's inaugurated kingdom does bring relief in this fallen world, social relief, emotional relief, economic relief. See, when God saves people, the way they use their money changes, right? And I can also be believing that my ultimate rest will not be in this world pre-consummation, but in the world to come. So as the more you listen to me talk and hear this mini-series, I hope you see that actually the post-millennial position is very balanced and nuanced, And the R2K, very pessimistic A mill, is very much one-dimensional. It is very one-dimensional. So we'll conclude this one, and I will move to the next one. This is the last Venema one. I think the next one is Bobnik. Grace and peace, signing off. Kingdom Polemics. Keep reading, keep reading, keep reading.